Modern retailers need every financial advantage to compete with online and win. New retail profits can be driven by better serving the customers you already have. Let PRN show you how to capture your fair share of digital marketing dollars from the $1 trillion global marketing spend. Smart retail digital networks from PRN help you monetize the aisle and win the day. To learn more, go to prn.com today. That's prn.com today to unlock this new revenue.
Wright, of course, stands apart because he is simultaneously examining the black community and also making it possible for the world to understand that this connects to the rest of the planet. It's not just Chicago. Yeah. But Nelson Algren is a hometown guy. Absolutely. And he lives near Bughouse Square. Is that what it was called?
Well, no, Bughouse Square, kind of a different thing. Algren lives in a very Polish neighborhood. His house no longer exists there. It's kind of in what is now like Clybourne Park area, Wicker Park. They're kind of now, it's a very...
that always happens.
Gentrified, exactly.
So, you should have seen it when I was here.
Back in the day when it was a pit. But, he lived in a little $10 a month kind of tenement after the war. But Algren really came out of the streets. He came out of the WPA. He was very connected to the left, and that's where he met Wright at John Reed Club and working on the WPA. Brooks is a little later. Gwendolyn Brooks comes into the 40s. She's also influenced by Wright, but she's also a good friend of Algren's. So they're an interesting kind of trio. I would say the three greatest writers post Dreiser, post Sandberg are these three, and they really are. They are friendly and know each other.
She does poetry, Wright, and Algren write the fiction, the literature, which actually is realistic fiction.
Yeah,
in a way that nothing I was familiar with growing up in the 1970s knew about.
I think they're the two great realists because they are focused on character. They don't come up with the lumpen dialogue.
And
they really bring
people
it to
die
life.
routinely. There's no romantic twist at the close.
Not at all.
Suffering and then silence.
And Man with the Golden Arm, I think, towers over everything else that he does, because as much as there is sympathy for these people and what Frankie Machine, the heroin-addicted card dealer, goes through, but there's also a sense that he has agency and responsibility. He's not given, it's society's fault. Society does a lot of bad things in this book and is responsible for enough, but Algren definitely makes it something that happens, and that Frankie has a hand in it as well. He does not make any excuses for anybody, and that's what I think makes that ultimately maybe the greatest realist novel, I think.
And his on-again, off-again relationship with Simone de Beauvoir represents what you'd have to say the lighter moments in the book, because it's a spectacular couple. Clearly, we needed a reality TV with those two going at it from Paris to Chicago. And minor players include French philosophers and other characters on the left bank, the left bank to Chicago's bank.
And where Wright goes. When Algren goes over to Paris at one point to visit de Beauvoir.
And Wright resents the fact that he doesn't stay.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, no, Wright expects him to stay and kind of turn his back on Chicago and America as a whole. And Algren says, no, I'm going back to keep fighting the good fight.
Tom and I have both spent time as novelists, and I mention this because growing up in America in the middle of the 20th century, you were led to believe that unless you drank a lot and smoked cigarettes a lot and hung around with drug addicts and went to dives and never called your mother, you were not worthy of being a fiction writer.
And
I
always
see that it
called
was
his
Nelson
mother.
Algren.
You got him wrong on the mom thing, because he was actually very nice to his mother, who was not nice to him. So there are photos of him way into her life. Yeah, Algren was an outlaw, and I think, but he wasn't always. I think what happens, there's a very interesting break. Studs Terkel and Algren are also very good friends. And Terkel, I think, always keeps a kind of flame going for this idea of the common man. That moment in Five Easy Pieces when Jack Nicholson complains about the toast with the waitress, Terkel would say, and he says this and I'm talking to myself, how is her day? Is anybody worried if her shoes don't fit right, if she's got a problem with her kid at home? And Algren would be Jack Nicholson in this point. He sees Chicago in the United States taking turns under McCarthy, under the racism of the time, under the kind of explosion of consumer wealth that becomes obsession with wealth. There's a difference between the two. And I think Algren is turned against the common man in a certain way. And that is what I think, to me, begins his outlaw influence in his kind of outlaw position.
Complete surprise. Ray Kroc. I would have said California. I would have said McDonald's was California. It's not. It turns out the genius Ray Kroc discovered it in Chicago. And the McDonald's brothers existed. I always thought it was a fiction.
They really existed. They existed. Ray Kroc was from Chicago, and he is a kind of bumps around the world a lot. He's in World War I with his friend Walt Disney in the same ambulance corps.
Walt Disney's from Chicago. And Ray Kroc kind of bounces around. He sells swampland in the Everglades. He sells paper cups. He plays lounge piano, always looking for the big break. He's selling mix masters. And he goes out to San Bernardino. And this is where he finds this amazing fast food place run by literally the McDonald brothers. Right. And he says, I got to have it. He just falls in love with the idea of this place. He goes to California and he falls in love.
Well, because they're buying so many of his mixmasters. They have like 40 of them. Right. Most places have one or two, and they have a dozen, And so he wants to see, what are they doing? So he loves this whole idea, and he makes a deal with them to franchise McDonald's. And they kind of toy with him. Like, they give him the rights. He finds out about a week before he's supposed to open his store in Des Plaines, Illinois, that, in fact, the one part of the world that they did not give him the rights to license was Chicago. So he has to make another deal. I mean, he was so kind of blindly in love with the idea that he just follows along with it. And at the time, it's something very different than what we think of it now. It was about quality food, about quality products, about service, good business, ethical business in a way, and mostly offering...
And independence from your mom and dad.
Well,
right.
Not necessarily independence from mom and... Except for the kids, yes. But what it was really offering was independence for entrepreneurs from corporate America and big gray flannel business, which was swelling into its kind of post-war regality, And so he was about small is beautiful.
And Ray Kroc is forever now part of Chicago. I thought he was San Diego. Now, coming back to the architecture, Mies. The building is 860-880 Lakeshore Drive?
860-880 Lakeshore Drive, arguably one of the most, probably in my mind, the most beautiful apartment building in the world.
It comes out of Bauhaus, through Mies, through the Fernwood House, through the anxieties of not having the right materials for the promontory building. Was that the first one? The concrete building.
Right.
And then he finally gets the steel and glass he needs and puts up 860-880. Is it a landmark building now that everybody wants to live in? Is that what it
Well, I don't know if everyone wants to live in it. It's in a certain way, it's a challenge to live in. Mies was someone who felt that his job was to be ahead of the curve, and an architect's job was to express what was going on and what was coming next. And so 860-880, like many of Mies's building, it doesn't function as well as it looks.
Oh, the Fernwood
Ironically
House.
enough, the Farnsworth
House.
Yes. Dr. Farnsworth sues him. They go to great lengths, have a terrible court case. Much of
Farnsworth,
right.
She's a physician,
nephrologist, and much of it is fueled by, in fact, her kind of unrequited big-time crush that she has on Mies, I think. But Mies's, if you were hiring Mies, you had to know what you were getting, which was something that was going to be way ahead of what was going on. Maybe it would be really hot in the winter. I mean, in the summer, and maybe it would condense the windows on the inside, and you'd get snow inside your apartment. But it was going to be something that you weren't going to have anywhere else. John Cage said how amazing that Mies invented the lightning when he was in the middle of a thunderstorm at 860, because there was nothing like it. You were floating in the air.
The politics, again, back to Chicago. Your story ends in 1960, and everything's set up. Everything has been foreshadowed now, the transformations that are going to happen. But since 1960, looking now through your book, I think that I'm disappointed in Chicago because it got to all of the critical questions first and then fell out of favor, fell behind. Was it the money? I'm asking you beyond the reaches of your book, but you stop. All the arguments were there in 1960 when you end the book.
Some of it was beyond the city's control. The Chicago I grew up in had a remarkable number of factories, Mars bars and Replogle globes, and it was the original Silicon Valley. It was manufacturing was out of Chicago, and when that went, that took hundreds of thousands of people and billions of dollars out of Chicago, and so that was beyond its control. I think the way ethnic white Chicagoans handled and the structure of the city handled integration, or what passed for it, was disastrous. And I think it is only now coming to terms with that in its ways. But that, I think, you can't lose 800,000 people in a city and still be on top.
The book is The Third Coast, When Chicago Built the American Dream. Thomas Dyges, the author. I'm John Batchelor. Thank you, Tom. This is The John Batchelor Show.